Welcome back to the Journey Podcast, a conversation series from Collegiate Sports Associates featuring leaders from across the intercollegiate athletics landscape. In this episode, CSA President and CEO Drew Turner sits down with Jeramiah Dickey, Director of Athletics at Boise State University. Jeramiah is not only a CSA placement, he's also a client, having used the firm for his most recent head football coach search. In this episode, Drew and Jeramiah reflect on Jeremiah's journey in athletics, including his time as an undergraduate at the University of Texas and his connection to his mentor, Mack Rhodes. We are honored to kick off a new year of the Journey Podcast with Jeramiah. Drew, take it away.
Well, Jeremiah, thanks so much for joining us. As you know, this is another episode of our podcast and YouTube series, The Journey, which talks a little bit about leaders in the industry of college athletics and their path, the role that they're in now. So, first of all, congrats on the recent news, the new contract extension that'll keep you in Boise for the next few years. Congrats on that. Well deserved.
Thank you, Drew, and thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It's good to connect, and I'm grateful for the contract, as you know, and you know, you've had probably more experience in this industry than I have with your dad. And anytime you get a university to that trusts you and extends you like that, it's a huge weight off an athletic director's shoulder. So I'm very grateful. My family's grateful, and we love being Broncos.
Well, congrats on all that you guys have accomplished there, and the great year that you just had, winning another Mountain West championship and in the college football playoff. A lot of excitement there in Boise.
Yeah, back-to-back Mountain West championships. That's our first time, which surprised me.
Sure.
At least in the Mountain West, and obviously we've been to back-to-back championships, but to win two in a row, and especially with how it started, you know, with us and in the decision I had to make the previous year. Really proud of Spencer and the team, and then what it's done for us. It's been phenomenal in regards to how Bronco Nation has stepped up, and I'm just really proud of my department. And you know, it takes a team, and you know, we're not done yet. You know, we hit the ground running at 25. Yeah, what's next?
What's next? Well, you know, a lot of people who'll be watching this interview, they read the D1 ticker, so they know about all that's happening at Boise State. They know about the great success that you all have had. But what they may not know about is your background, your history, and how you got to the role that you're in now. And we want to talk about your early stops in your athletics career, but I'd like to go back even further than that. I mean, talk a little bit about your upbringing and you know, your personal life in this industry, and how you even, you know, found college athletics, or at what point you thought this was a career you may want to pursue, starting back from the early days.
Yeah. One, I'm not an outlier, you know, and that's important to me. You know, I grew up in an athletic family. You know, sport was always important. That was a connection to my dad and my grandfather. My grandfather was the team doctor at UTEP under the late and great Don Haskins, you know, and so I was very connected at UTEP, and whether it was with camps or going to games, some of my first memories as a child was going to those games. And, you know, and I think the seed was planted there. Now, at that time, I had no idea that this industry even existed. You know, but you know, as I grew up and ultimately got into college, you know, I thought everyone just showed up, and it was, you know, I knew about the coaches, but you didn't really hear about athletic directors or administration. And back in the day, you know, we have 225 staff members. You know, my guess is UTEP probably had 50, you know, that were actually serving, you know, their student athletes, staff, and supporters. And so that's where it started for me. I grew up, born and raised in El Paso, Texas. Obviously, I'm the oldest of four, you know, and just really appreciate my upbringing. There were a lot of lessons learned, and really appreciate my mom and dad, and for some of the things they instilled in me, you know, work ethic and attitude. Those are the only two things that you can control, and that was important to them. And, you know, but then also always pushing me that, you know, never to settle. And that's probably a little bit where that what's next mentality comes from. You know, that whatever your passion is, reach for greatness. And if you're going to spend time, effort, and energy on it, you might as well, you know, put forth the effort to be the best. And I'm not there yet. I'm not a finished product, but a lot of who I am today is because of them and people along the way that, you know, in many ways cared about me more than I probably cared about myself as as someone who had to learn the hard way sometimes. Played high school basketball, and that was the sport I was best in. Was not good enough to play at the next level. I was also realistic in terms of my athletic ability, and but really enjoyed it. Enjoyed being a part of a team. I was a team captain, and started for the majority of my high school career, and just had a really
position.
Well, I was a power forward, and I think that's where reality hit. That as a really power forward in high school, I was pretty big, but that was a point guard at the next level, and that's not what I was. So, but yeah, I played small forward, power forward, and just really appreciated it, and things that tie into who I am today. It takes a team. Like I was the guy who was willing to roll up his sleeves, and I did the dirty work, the rebounding and the defense, and the coach on the floor, and not really knowing at that time that would pay dividends down the road. But I look back, and it's hindsight's everything. That everything happens for a purpose, and to be brought up in that environment and have the connections I did in terms of UTEP, which we'll get to in terms of my path. I definitely am not an outlier, and I have a lot of people to thank, and I'm very grateful for that have helped me get to the chair I sit in today.
And then after high school, it was UT Austin, right, for undergrad?
Correct. I grew up in a University of Texas family. My grandmother was from Austin. My great-grandmother lived in Austin at that point. My aunt lived in Austin. Every spring break and summer of my childhood, we would go drive across Texas from El Paso to Austin for spring break and summer break. And so it was Texas or Texas. That was the only thing my mom said. She said, "You're going to college." That was started very early on in my childhood, that I was going to college and that I would not be going to UTEP. That was no offense to UTEP, but she knew I needed to spread my wings and get away. And so it was Texas. And that also tied in the reality of my athletic ability, because at that time, Rick Barnes had Texas rolling. And
he didn't come looking for a walk-on spot, huh?
Oh God, I maybe I could have, but I also am not that smart, and so I couldn't even have been the GPA, guy on the bench that was bringing up the overall team average. So
you could have been a great morale booster, though. It was like locker room guy. So when you're at UT, again, like at one moment you're like, all right, there's a career in this college athletics business that took you to UTEP from there, or when did you decide this was what you wanted to do? Or did you have thoughts about being a doctor or working in business? I mean, talk to us about how you landed in this place.
I actually went to school. I wanted to be an attorney. And then from that, changed my degree multiple times and decided I didn't want to do that. And I just didn't have, you go from high school where you have all this structure and discipline, and you have mom and dad, and you have your coach and your teammates. And now all of a sudden I'm on my own, and I had to grow up really quickly. And I probably didn't mature as quickly as I should have. And, I got to a place that I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't really have a defined path. I was always a hard worker and enjoyed people and the relationship sides of business. And so I remember, like it was yesterday, I called my mom and my aunt. And my aunt lived in Austin at that point, and I was close with her. She's no longer with us. And I said, I'm going to take a semester off. And this was at the end of my junior year. And I know, and this sounds dramatic, Drew, but the way I was living my life wasn't right. I really enjoyed 6th Street and, the finer things of Austin. And, hindsight, like if I would have taken that semester off, I would not necessarily not just be an AD. I'm not sure I would be here in this world right now. And so I knew where that was going. If I took a semester off, I would never have done that.
Yep.
And my mom and aunt cared about me more than I cared about myself. And they said, don't do anything. I want to get you connected. And tying in, I'm not an outlier. My mom taught school with Mack Rhodes' wife. And my mom said, hey, I've met this woman named Amy, and her husband works for UTEP in the athletics department. And that was like the first real time that it really dawned on me, like, wow, there is this behind the team behind the team.
Sure.
And I went home that summer and I ended up working at a basketball camp. I got to meet Mack Rhodes, and, he was, I think, an associate AD, maybe for external at that point, and wanted to be an AD. He told me about his path, why he chose administration versus coaching. And then I left that camp and I went and met with Don Haskins. And Don Haskins, through my grandfather, said, and I knew Coach Haskins, growing up in El Paso, went and met with Coach. And he said, Jeremiah, like, you want to get into coaching? I've already talked to Rick Majerus, who was at Utah at the time. And he would promise you a video coordinator type role off the court at Utah upon graduation. So I went back to Austin with this, this kind of new thought or idea of what my life could be. And part of it was coaching, part of it was administration. And then my aunt was really close because she ran Keep Austin Beautiful. She was really close with Chris Plonsky at University of Texas, who's a legend. And I can't thank enough for her help and support over the years. And then a guy by the name of Chris Bloomfield, who worked for Host Communications, who's still in the industry. And so I was able to, coming out of this, and it was such a quick pivot at this crossroads of life of, I'm going to essentially drop out, and God knows what would have happened to me.
Yeah.
To, now all of a sudden I have a path for administration because Max said, I'll give you an internship upon graduation, a path to coaching if I wanted it. And then my aunt was able to, through her relationships, I was able to get an internship at the University of Texas in marketing promotions, and then also work for Host Communications. So sitting in the press box and running like the static signage that was on the field. And the rest is history. I achieved my degree. My academics improved significantly, which was a positive. And, and at that point in time, I decided I wanted to be an athletic director. I wrote down my goals and upon graduation called Mack that, and said, hey, you said you would help me and I need an internship to finish this degree program. Could I come back to UTEP?
Well, I am obviously we know each other pretty well. I know your resume very well, but the before the professional experience start, before that UTEP opportunity, I didn't know all that. So that's I appreciate you sharing, and I think hearing that probably speaks to your what's next mentality that you've coined there in Boise, is that with a plan, with a vision, you can be something greater. Which obviously you took an opportunity, went from somebody that maybe didn't have a plan to figured out, okay, there's a career in this. You got an opportunity, and look what you've made of it. So that's really cool. Thank you for sharing. And then you make the connection with Mack, which probably speaks to the importance for anybody out there who's early in their career and aspires to be in the chair that you hold. I mean, I think your connection to Mack and the importance of mentors. I guess what I'm asking is, what advice would you give to an up-and-comer in the industry about building relationships with a strong mentor and really taking advantage of that?
It's been invaluable for me. Mack actually called me this morning and I missed his call, so I owe the call back. But, there's a lot of trust, when you're looking for that mentor role, and it's easy to identify, people with titles. And I get a lot of calls as a sitting AD now, people that want to be mentored, but it's a two-way street. It's the willingness of that person to pour into you, but it's also your willingness to create the relationship and be consistent with it and follow up and so on and so forth. And, and Mack, I can't say enough about him, how he helps me. And there probably hasn't been, it's fair to say, there probably hasn't been a decision I've made in my career where I didn't call him and say, what do you think? And, I'm human, we all have those great characteristics. I'm stubborn and selfish and, all these qualities that it's nice to have someone like him who knows me and has poured into me and can call me, out for my blinders and, and how that transpired over time. Early on, he was growing and he wasn't an AD yet. And I was learning through him and seeing his, maturation from being an associate AD for external to when I got to UTEP. By that time, he was essentially a deputy AD. He had the world's longest title, but he was running this department under Coach Stoll and to see how he grew and what I was able to just learn from him by watching. And, I was an intern. Like, I didn't deal with Mack on a daily basis, but I saw when he got in the office. I saw when he left the office. I saw how he treated people. I saw how he made decisions. I saw how he handled a situation when it's maybe uncomfortable, what you would call a crucial conversation.
Yeah.
And then, how he followed up to make sure that that person was okay and that they understood the expectations, but that he was right there with them and he was in the foxhole. I learned so much, and so much of who I am today, I owe to him, and ultimately when you're identifying those mentors and the people that are of value to you, not everyone's perfect. Mack has his faults, and Mack will be the first one to tell you what his faults are, but you can learn so much from that. And the idea is to take as much of the good as you can. And it's not just Mack, it's a Hunter Yurachek, who I met at the University of Akron after I left UTEP to follow Mack. And just seeing how they both handled their business and balanced, I don't believe in work-life balance. It's life, and you prioritize, and how they prioritize their life, and how their kids were important to them, and how their faith was important to them, and how their wives were important to them, and how they put themselves in position for what's next and told their story, and those are all things that it was an amazing experience for me. And even when I was going through it, I probably didn't realize how important it was to me until I got to this chair where I could think through, very emotional for me, but like think through those peaks and valleys and those crossroads and those decisions that I made and ultimately what led to me being the AD at Boise State. I'm so thankful. And more importantly for the failures and the challenges along the way, because it really refined me. And to have people like that in your foxhole that, they didn't crush me. They brought me along. They said, no, we don't do that. This is why. That was important to me. And so I can't say enough. And sometimes I feel guilty, Drew, because, I'm not an outlier, and I do, my faith is important to me, and I do believe everything happens for a reason. And I mean, how lucky am I that I could lean on someone like a Mack Rhodes, who I consider one of the best ADs in the country, or Hunter Yurachek, who I consider one of the best ADs in the country. And the fact that our paths crossed and actually, what that's meant to my career, I'll forever be grateful.
Well, I think, advice to people watching this who aspire to be in your chair, we get asked all the time, like, hey, how do I get that AD opportunity, or what can I do? Should I take this next job that gets me closer to this job? You stuck with a mentor at multiple stops, or didn't stick with, you followed a mentor. And, I think back to when we were involved at the Boise search. You don't get that search without Mack Rhodes, right? I mean, he was able to talk about, because he knew you, he'd worked with you for a decade. He talk about hiring somebody during a 60-minute interview, or at that time in the heart of COVID, which we'll get to the Boise interview process, crazy here in a moment. But like, it's really hard to get a total sense of somebody from a 60-minute Zoom interview. And because of Mack, we were able to find out and share with Dr. Trump and the people at Boise, what you were going to be like when that Zoom interview process ended. And you actually got to meet people in person, because it was literally the heart of COVID, I think December 20.
Right.
And because he'd worked with you for so long, because you had that mentor, they knew exactly what they were going to get if they hired Jeramiah Dickey. And, obviously the results speak for themselves. So again, back to like the advice for the folks watching this, don't just chase that next job for the $5,000 raise or the bump in the title, because down the line, in my opinion, I know this is your interview, not mine, but down the line, it's going to be not that title that's closer to the AD chair that gets you the job. It's going to be the advocacy from the person who really knows you. And in your case, it was Mack. Had you worked with Mack for 2 years at UTEP and then jumped to another job, like you don't have those really trusted relationships that are so valuable.
Yeah, no, that's 100% right. And, Mack, he knew what was positive about me. He knew what was negative about me.
Yeah.
We're not perfect and we're not a finished product. And I think that, I think about that situation and, it was so valuable to me and ultimately Dr. Trump and you all talking to him and Hunter and there were other, I picked up mentors along the way, as I was continuing to learn and educate and professionalize. myself, but yeah, it definitely makes a difference. And it's something that I think about. It started back at UTEP, the reason he brought me along, and, in some of these qualities that he instilled in me, or maybe that I had that he brought out, that he saw how I worked. And I bring that up because you're always interviewing.
Yeah.
How you present yourself and how you show up and your level of work ethic and your attitude. And, that started at a very young age, at a time in my life that I was still learning a lot, but being able to grow with him and, and take on, the feedback that he provided. He probably knows me better. I know myself, because he doesn't have the blinders I have myself.
Yeah.
And, and I think it was really powerful for him to talk to a Dr. Trump or anyone else on that committee, in terms of who I am. And, when you're on an interview and you get, I think I had 2 interviews of 6 minutes each, and on Zoom, and you're not in person, and, I'm a talker. And so, and relationships are important to me, and that was really hard, and not being able to come visit. And so, I would very much give him and Hunter and Coach Rule and many others that I'm sure were spoken to, credits outside of what I brought to the table in terms of, the experience over the course of 18 plus years before I was able to get some chair.
So let's go back to a little over 4 years ago, I guess, right? Because it was December of 20. I actually remember it vividly. We were, we had just been engaged with Boise to do their AD search, and I think this is, like mid-December 20. And I was on my way to my wife's family's house in Virginia, and the news breaks that Coach Harsin is leaving Boise State to go to Auburn. And at the time, our plan was, a typical process, maybe a 60-day search process. We'd met with the search committee. We were going to recruit to the pool. The committee was going to narrow it down to 6 to 8 candidates. After the holiday, we were going to, go more formal process. Well, he leaves, and they got to hire a football coach, because you got to build your roster in college football these days. And I remember Randy Hales, who of course was the committee chair, Dr. Trump, Alicia Esty, and our team got on a call, and we talked through things, and we said, hey, look, you're going to have to hire a football coach. And they wanted the AD to have a role in that. And so we went from breaking for the holiday and we'll see you after the new year and start the search process to, all right, you interview 6 people, and we need to do it before Christmas Eve. And I think it was like the 22nd or whatever. But I remember calling you from the car and saying, what do you think about Boise? I think you were on your way to your in-laws too.
Yeah, I was actually, I remember it was December 26th.
Okay.
It was the day after Christmas. And that, if you remember, that was the first COVID season, and it was hell.
Yeah.
And it was chaos. And I told Mack, I need a break, and I'm going to drive, just because the flights and whatever were challenging at that point. I'm going to drive to Illinois to see my wife's family and with my family. And so I got there on the 24th. We have Christmas, 26th. And I remember being out, we were walking through this small community. It's like 5,000 people, Momence, Illinois. And you called me, and obviously you and I were friends, and I thought, honestly, you were calling about one of our coaches. And I had no idea. And I remember sending you to voicemail because I was walking with my wife. We were talking about kind of that new year and New Year's resolutions, other things from a family perspective. And then you called me back, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to answer it, this time, because I was going to call you later. And that's when you said, are you interested? And obviously I was, but then it was the follow-up to that, which my heart dropped. Great. Darren should too. And you may be interviewing in the next 24 to 48 hours. And I'm like, I'm not in my office. I'm out of my element. I'm at my in-laws. And it was a sprint, but I think everything happens for a reason. It probably helped me, just navigating that. And that was the first time I had ever interviewed for an AD job. and that doesn't normally happen. And so, it was an experience for sure. And obviously having a family there and being able to talk through with them that, as we loved Waco and we loved Baylor, life could potentially change. Insurance, but you got to be prepared for that.
And again, your situation was so unique because it was the heart of COVID, and hopefully we don't go back to an environment like that. Hopefully you get a chance. I don't think you hadn't been to Idaho, the state, had you, before you accepted the job? Yeah. So, these days, obviously you likely have a chance to see campus or see, meet people in person. So what advice would you give to somebody who maybe hasn't had that opportunity yet to interview for a job, but how quick they move and maybe the conversations you need to have on the home front to be prepared for when that offer may come because of how quick it goes from offer to, hey, are you going to take this or not?
That's a great question. So Boise State was on our list, and I say our list. My wife worked in athletics, and we met at the University of Akron, and we had this running list, of schools that we would be interested in. I understand, and I think it's an important point, and Mack had always told me this: go somewhere where you can be your authentic self.
Yeah.
And so I knew where I fit, I knew where I didn't, and Boise State was one of those brands that really resonated with me. It's who I am. I'm blue collar, and so that was on my list. So we had already had that conversation. So that made it that much easier because we had already somewhat talked through these opportunities and potentially what that would look like. And, you look at 134 FBS, and I wanted to be an FBS AD. And so it made it, not significantly easier, but it made at least the conversation with my wife that much easier that we had somewhat, planned to work the plan. And we prepared that Boise State was on the list, and this is something that I would absolutely be interested in. And that relieved a lot of pressure on the front end.
Yeah.
Now COVID added other challenges because, we hadn't been to Idaho, and it's not like I'd been to every school that I potentially would have been interested in at that point in time. But that got us over that first hurdle of,
sure,
I didn't necessarily have to convince my wife. My wife understood those were my goals. We were very transparent in terms of what we wanted in life and what we wanted for our kids and where we wanted to be as a family. And family is a priority for me. And, and so to have her on board early on and knowing how quickly things were moving, that relieved a lot of pressure. And if I wouldn't have had those conversations and I would have been convincing her while I'm trying to convince you all that I'm the right candidate, that would have created, a lot more work for me. And not saying you can't get there, but it relieved a lot of pressure and stress, from that decision process.
Is there any advice or was there anything that surprised you of just how, probably never been through an AD negotiation before? Like, how'd you work through that? Did you lean on Mack? Was there anything that you would have done differently just when that offer actually did come?
Yeah, well, one, I want to give a shout out to your dad. He helped significantly, and I probably at that point in time had talked to you way more than I had ever talked to him, and that was on me. I should have created the relationship, but I really appreciate his help through that and his experience. And but I also was talking to Mack and Hunter and others in my life, my father, as we were going through that, that is something that I never had to go through. I never had to negotiate, anytime I had followed Hunter or Mack or both, in terms of my stops, it was pretty set in stone and I kind of knew what it was. And, but when you become an AD, it opens up to, incentives and other things that, I just wasn't probably used to navigating. And so I leaned on in the search firm, you in this case, in terms of your experiences and at that point, what was important to me is I knew what my value was, but I also wanted to be an AD, and I just didn't want to, it's not necessarily about the money for me and for many people, it's the why and our purpose in this. But I just wanted to make sure it made sense.
Sure.
And yes, I needed people like Mack and Hunter who had gone through that multiple times to say, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that relieved a lot of pressure as well, because then that dominoed into a conversation with my wife. This is what it is. And, and what does that look like in terms of what we're currently making and so on and so forth. And so, yes, that negotiation was made so much easier based on those mentors and and utilizing the search firm and asking questions, because it was all new for me, and I didn't claim to know anything about that process. And I get, probably would help me to go through other processes, and in hindsight, I probably, and maybe additional advice, I would have gone through one or two, AD searches before. I had always I was where my feet were. And if I wasn't 100% in, it was hard for me to put my resume in or show interest, just because of the mentality I had at that point. And I'm not saying I still don't have that, but I think it would have helped me to have that practice and being able to go through what those questions would be. And that was probably a good learning experience for me.
Well, it worked out. So, don't be too hard on yourself. I want to be respectful of time. And I know we've taken about a half hour here, but I do have just a couple more questions for you. So get the AD job. You've been watching ADs, been at their, the seat next to them for many years. Can you tell a story of you're the boss now and you're in the chair, a specific story from your time where you're like, oh shoot, I got to make this decision, or this was really challenging, or I didn't expect this. Anything that comes to mind from first reps, I'm in charge?
So many stories that first semester. We were still in COVID. My team was not in office. And so making them come back to the office April 1st, I arrived, probably mid-January, after I made the transition, and that was really hard. People are a great asset, and I needed to get to know my people, and everything was Zoom and phone calls. And so that was one of the first decisions that, telling, and understanding there was still this level of fear and uncomfortableness around COVID, and, but making that decision that I need to see my people and I need to be able to meet with them and, and figure out, define the direction for this department. And a big part of that as a new AD was, curiously questioning, not coming in and saying, this is what we're going to do and how we're going to do it and let's go. It was meeting with every staff member and giving them their time and seeing what they saw in the department and maybe where there were opportunities or things that we were doing that weren't working, and getting their thoughts because they were on the ground. I came to a place that I'd never been before. I didn't know anyone, and, I had to lean on them. So, but that first decision of telling people I need you back in the office so we can start these conversations and work on what's next. The other thing, that semester I hired 3 new coaches, and that was challenging, but when you get to that place and, that's coming in COVID and everyone's uncomfortable in some of those decisions, and then that first semester I also got called about conference realignment and so there was no time there was no transition period. Like I just got thrown into the deep end and, it's sink or swim. And, and so having to make a decision of, I'm still wrapping my head around where I'm at and where the opportunities exist. And to tell another conference, no, we're not interested, and that, what I learned very early on is there's risk and reward in every decision. And I'm not always going to have all the information to make the decision as the athletic director, but I need to feel comfortable enough that ultimately my name's on it and I'm the leader of this department and I'm going to wear whatever that decision is. And then it goes without saying, making a decision or being part of a decision about our next football coach. That was my first week on the job.
Yeah.
And, that was important. I believe everything happens for a reason. And, we had some success, but ultimately decided we needed to go a different direction down the road. But, that also led to Spencer Danielson, who was the interim when I first arrived. And, I think about, everything happens for a reason. If I wouldn't have gone that direction, I'm not sure Spencer would have stayed, and I'm not sure Spencer would be our coach today. Yeah. And, and so I do know everything happens for a reason, but that was a challenging decision. I'm trying to learn about our community, our institution, and my department. No one's in the office. I'm making a decision on a coach, and there was a lot of uncomfortableness around budget and the financial piece because of COVID. And, but those are what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Like those are, I got baptized by fire, very early on that it really prepared me to move that much quicker through our What's Next initiative and what was important to us.
So I know your faith, your family are really important to you, as well as your job. And there's only so many hours in a day. I mean, how do you balance it all? And you said it like, hey, it's not work-life balance, it's life, and you make your decisions. But what does that mean? I mean, how do you keep your faith strong, great relationship with your family, and also deliver on the what's next mentality?
Yeah, I'm as I've said before, I'm healthy. Yeah, it's hard. I care very much about my faith, and that's who I am. That's my foundation, and they're non-negotiable for me. I don't unless I'm traveling and there's reasons I don't miss church. And my team knows that, and it doesn't mean I won't be available where after, but that's foundational to who I am, and I prioritize that. I prioritize my kids' games, and I schedule, which was a point of contention. I'm with my wife, but it's really paid dividends. I schedule time with my wife, so my staff knows and my team knows that's time for him to connect, because I probably am addicted to this job. I'm passionate about it. I love what I do. I love my team. I'm responsible for a lot. I'm a servant leader, and so I want to be available and do what others need me to do. But my wife is the rock at home. She takes care of our kids. She takes care of our house. I don't have to worry about any of that. And I'm very fortunate and grateful. And so there is this, priority to connect with her, and make sure that we have those check-ins. And then there's nuances to it. I've learned along the way, like I'm much better earlier in the day than I am later because of the number of words you use and the meetings and stresses and decisions. And so it's not dinners, it's lunches, because I can create the bandwidth that I can connect with her appropriately. I do not do it perfect, and I still have a lot to learn. And that's still one of, the challenges I face, with what ADs are going through right now, and the uncomfortableness of our industry and the chaos and somewhat insanity. It's a 24/7 deal. This idea that we can put our phone down, and I hear others say it, and maybe it's more of a personality flaw with me. That's not something I feel comfortable with. I want to be what my team needs me to be. I'm the leader of this department. I'm there to promote and protect. And I need to be involved as much as I need to be involved. And so I make myself available, but that does not mean I don't find times to take my kids skiing or to go on a vacation. I have in very, specific conversations with my wife and kids. I try to include them as much as I possibly can. I took my daughter and one of my sons on a football trip this year. I'm taking the youngest, on a basketball trip. They go to the bowl games with me. They go to the NCAA tournaments with me. They come to conferences, depending on what those conferences are, whether it's like a Mountain West conference meeting or, the Fiesta in Arizona, and trying to bring my wife this year. I try to create opportunities around the job. And, sometimes that's hard because my wife may not get 100% of me, but, there is some level of balance in how I prioritize that, which helps me do my job. If I'm not leading out in action, what's important to me, what type of leader am I for my team? I want my team to feel comfortable bringing their kids in the office. So I bring my kids to the office in the summer. I want my team to feel comfortable to say, Jeremiah, I need a break, and for them to be able to get that break. And that required me to be extremely authentic and transparent with them, and for them to understand where my heart is. And that includes even challenges and opportunities that I have personally and professionally. So we have a very open department, and a lot of that ties into how I prioritize my life in terms of my faith and family.
Yeah, no, that's really good and great advice too. We work in an industry that is nonstop, and it's okay to recharge sometimes. It's okay to have a family and a life outside of it. So you're a great example of that. I'm sincerely appreciative of your time. I know how busy you are. Thanks for doing this. It's always great to see you. And we'll be following along to see what's next.
I appreciate you. You're a big part of my story, and I'm grateful for you, and thanks for the opportunity.